I do think once that is removed, we will get to those all-time highs. I have a stronger conviction in our 200,000 December Bitcoin call than I did when we made it. I actually feel better about it today than I did back then because there's been so much delivery of good news in the interim. I believe they're going to actively buy more Bitcoin before the end of this year. We found out that Abu Dhabi is buying Bitcoin. The SEC removed essentially all of its negative lawsuits against the crypto industry. People think we're going to get stablecoin and market structure regulation before the August congressional recess. It's been a clean sweep of everything we want.
Matt Hougan starts out by talking about irritation, a feeling that many people in the crypto industry are all too familiar with. Bitcoin's price remains in neutral, despite a slew of encouraging developments in the cryptocurrency space, including regulatory victories and rising institutional interest. However, Matt claims that the answer is found in the larger macroeconomic context, which he describes as being incredibly irritating. Typical market volatility isn't all we're dealing with. Instead, geopolitical unpredictability, trade threats, and election-related uncertainty, particularly from the Trump administration, dominate the environment we're navigating. Despite Bitcoin's fundamental strength, investors are holding back because of the wider unpredictability, which is weighing down the market. The economic background is acting as a barrier, despite the fact that the crypto fundamentals are screaming positive. Please remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and enable post notifications before we delve further. Thank you, and enjoy the video.
I always think that during bear markets or choppy periods, the market ignores good news, but it doesn't disappear. It gets stored as dry powder for when that volatility removes. And if you think back over the last few months, boy, have we had a lot of good news. The US established a strategic Bitcoin reserve. I believe they're going to actively buy more Bitcoin before the end of this year. We found out that Abu Dhabi is buying Bitcoin. The SEC removed essentially all of its negative lawsuits against the crypto industry. People think we're going to get stablecoin and market structure regulation before the August congressional recess. It's been a clean sweep of everything we want, right? This is a market that should be already at 150K and going higher, and it just hasn't been able to because it's Liberation Day today. And that's all that people can focus on. I do think once that is removed, we will get to those all-time highs. I have a stronger conviction in our 200,000 December Bitcoin call than I did when we made it. I actually feel better about it today than I did back then because there's been so much delivery of good news in the interim. Oh, man, I can't wait to hear what Ryan has to say. I find it annoying. Annoying is the word I have for the current macro setup. There's so much good things going on in Bitcoin specifically and crypto more broadly that we should be ripping to all-time highs right now. And because of this macro volatility, we're just awash on the sea of Trump's tariffs, uncertain of where we go next. It's annoying. I can't wait for it to be over. I'm with you. I want some certainty. I care less about what it is. I think once we have uncertainty baked into the market, the fundamentals of crypto will take back over and we will be back at all-time highs. I've actually been tremendously heartened by the strength of Bitcoin in the face of this macro uncertainty, right? Since the election, I know everyone's hyped about gold. Since the election, Bitcoin has strongly outperformed gold. It's strong. There it is. It's strongly outperformed the S&P 500. It's crushed the Qs. It's in a position to race to all-time highs and then beyond, but we have to get through this uncertainty. So I find it annoying. That's my word for it. I think alt season is dead. I think we're not entitled to alt season. And I think the reason we historically had alt season was that crypto was a purely speculative asset class. And all of what we were betting on Ethereum, Solana, etc., was in the future. And I think where we're at now is we're in the fundamental era of crypto. And in a fundamental era of crypto, you won't have the same sort of clear seasonality where everything rallies together and you can throw a dart at the wall and whatever you hit will go up. What you'll have is a market where individual assets respond to individual fundamentals. So why did Solana do so well last year? Well, the fundamentals of Solana last year were fantastic. Massive developer activity, strong community activity, meme coin activity, huge revenue growth. Put those together, you have an asset rally. Why did ETH fumble? Because its fundamentals weren't as good. Why is Bitcoin doing so well right now? Because its fundamentals are strong. So I think we sort of have to scrub from our mind the idea that we're entitled to alt season where everything rises. First Bitcoin, then the other 10 assets, and then the really speculative stuff. That was when crypto was driven purely by speculation. And I think now We're increasingly driven by fundamentals, and that's going to be differential performance. I'm very bullish about those fundamentals. I'm actually bullish even on ETH fundamentals long term. But I do think it's going to be asset specific to a greater degree than it has been in the past. I think the seasonality has changed. It's companies that own at least 1,000 Bitcoin as a treasury asset, weighted largely by the amount of Bitcoin they own. So Strategy is the largest holding, Mara, CleanSpark, etc. But we think this list is going to extend to a large number of companies. You know, the thing I was thinking about when Ryan was talking about GameStop starting to buy Bitcoin is I know a lot of people look at this development and think it's all these weird companies like Michael Saylor and his messianic view of Bitcoin and these crypto miners. But if you think back to like the early days of asset managers in crypto, it was unusual companies too. It was Bitwise, it was Grayscale, it was family-owned businesses like Van Eck and Fidelity. And now guess what? It's BlackRock and Invesco. And I think the same thing is going to happen here. I think we're going to, of course, it's people on the edges who do this first, but I think we're not that far removed from large cap S&P 500 companies own Bitcoin on their balance sheet as well. So this ETF will kind of capture those forward-thinking companies, and I think there's a lot of demand for this kind of exposure from investors, and I think it's a great set of companies.
One of Matt's key points revolves around the idea of a U.S. strategic Bitcoin reserve. Critics often argue that supporting Bitcoin goes against American values because it's not a dollar-based currency. But Matt disagrees. He believes the U.S. embracing Bitcoin isn't about replacing the dollar, it's about protecting against geopolitical risks. If the U.S. ever loses its status as the global reserve currency due to rising debt or political missteps, wouldn't it be better for the world to shift toward a neutral asset like Bitcoin rather than a foreign competitor like China's yuan? By integrating Bitcoin into the financial system, the US adds flexibility. It's not about replacing the dollar, it's about safeguarding America's future influence. We're about to dive deep into his insights. But before we do, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay updated with our latest videos.
And said that this is akin to the US establishing a Chinese yuan reserve, right? Promoting something to replace the dollar as the world's reserve currency. And that's actually precisely wrong. I'm a strong proponent of the US dollar being the world's reserve currency. I know we'll talk about how stable coins can extend the period of time that the US dollar can serve as the world's reserve currency. It's good for America, which is a country that I live in. But we have to accept that there is a possible world in the future where we cede sole ownership of being the world's reserve currency. It's happened to every world reserve currency in the past. We have highly, accelerating debt and deficits. It could happen to the US in the future. And if it does, what do we want to happen? Do we want it to go to a non-political currency like Bitcoin, or do we want to go to a currency of one of our enemies, right? Or another foreign government? And all the strategic Bitcoin reserve does is it tilts that alternate stream that says if the world wants to move off the dollar as the sole reserve asset, maybe the future will be dollar and then apolitical Bitcoin. And that's a lot better future for the US than going from dollar to Chinese yuan, which is the other option. So we can't ignore the possibility that this might happen in the future. And I think it's very forward thinking to sort of aim the flow of where we end up to something that's at least neutral, which is what Bitcoin is. But then I use this as an example because let's say I had decided to buy $1,000 of Bitcoin. The largest exchange in crypto at the time was New Liberty Standard. And this is its terms of service. You can buy Bitcoins by sending a PayPal payment to this address. I try to process it in 48 hours. This is a personal hobby. Everything on this site is legal as far as I know. So like it's easy to say today, I should have gone and bought $1,000 of Bitcoin. But at the time, it meant sending $1,000 to a random dude who said it maybe is legal what I'm doing. Like there was just so much risk. And if you think about it, that's been true throughout crypto's history. We had trading risk. Then we had custody risk. Where would I have custodied my crypto? Probably at Mt. Gox. Like, oh, that didn't turn out so well, right? And then we had regulatory risk. And then there was the risk of would institutions adopt it? And, would we ever get an ETF? There were just so many risks in crypto all along the way that from a risk-adjusted basis, like, of course, from an absolute basis, I should have gone out and bought Bitcoin when it was $1. But adjusting for all the risk, the trading risk, the custody risk, the regulatory risk, etc., it was a terrible investment. That's why I didn't do it. You shouldn't feel bad if you didn't do it as well. The point I was making to get to this idea that this is the best risk-adjusted moment to buy Bitcoin in history is we've removed all of the existential risks. The last existential risk, the one that I was still worried about as recently as 6 months ago, was that the US government would ban it. That one day the US government would feel the dollar was threatened by Bitcoin and it would ban it the way it effectively banned the private ownership of gold in the 1930s. And that was still a major risk. Like your investment could go down a lot if that happened. But now we have a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Now it's in the US's interest to support Bitcoin. So we've removed all of the existential risks from Bitcoin. And yet we still have a 10x to go before we match gold. And I think Bitcoin will ultimately be much more than gold. So there's still 10, 20x more upside and very little of this existential risk on the downside. There's no risk that Bitcoin is going to zero. It's like an incredible setup. That's why I've been so excited to be on the road and sort of help people realize this. It's the best moment in history to buy Bitcoin. From where I sit.
Why this might be the greatest moment in history to purchase Bitcoin is explained by Matt Hougan. He begins by discussing how dangerous it was in the early days of Bitcoin. He would have needed to transmit $1,000 to an online stranger in order to purchase Bitcoin. Although there were no assurances, the website claimed that it was lawful. He would still need to decide where to keep it after purchasing it. In addition, there were worries about whether institutions would embrace Bitcoin or if it would be prohibited. Things are different now. The major concern that the US government will outlaw Bitcoin has been dispelled. In reality, the United States is bolstering Bitcoin by maintaining a strategic Bitcoin reserve, which is analogous to how nations hold gold. This is significant because it indicates that Bitcoin is no longer viewed as a danger to the dollar, but rather as a valuable tool to complement it. Bitcoin might take over as a neutral currency if the United States loses its status as the primary reserve currency of the world. Additionally, Matt is quite enthusiastic about the future of decentralized finance and Bitcoin. DeFi, which provides financial services without the need for traditional banks, is still underappreciated in his opinion. Stablecoins and cryptocurrency wallets are becoming more and more popular, and it will soon be much simpler for anyone to lend, borrow, or trade cryptocurrency. Matt believes that this growth is only the beginning. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and enable notifications for more valuable content, and as always, happy investing.